The Sandy and Toddcast is a Mindgarden Media podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. We are rolling through the season of the Sandy and Toddcast. Time for another episode.
Almost done with this season, and we're going to round it out with some of the cases involving Ed and Lorraine Warren, who we've talked about a little bit here and there over the past seasons, very much so the last couple of weeks. And this week, we're going to be talking about the Smurl haunting, pretty famous haunting.
That's coming up on the Sandy and Toddcast, Season 10, Episode 7, The Warrens. Continue on the Sandy and Toddcast. Hang on.
Hey gang, we are Damon,
Sue, and Amy Lynn
from the Ed Park Paranormal Society.
Join us for each episode of the Apps Alchemy Podcast as we take a deep dive into the world of the paranormal, cryptids, the occult, and more. We've seen, heard, and experienced almost everything, and now we're bringing it all to you.
Find us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, and anywhere you might find your podcasts. Apps Alchemy Podcast is a Mindgarden Media production.
Broadcasting from two very different yet magical places not found on any map. Get ready to discuss the strange, weird, ghostly, crazy, spooky, and odd things that take place around us each and every day. All while having a little bit of fun. This is the Sandy and Toddcast.
The Sandy and Toddcast is on your smartphone, your radio, however you're listening right now, on your laptop, on your tablet, whatever they got. She is Sandy.
He is Todd.
And here we go.
Here we go. So this week, we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the Warrens and Lorraine Warren and discuss one of the more well-known cases. They claim to have worked on over 10,000 cases in their lifetime. Obviously, not all very, very well-known, which I think, in my opinion, adds to their credibility. You know, if they claimed all 10,000 cases were, and I believe 10,000 cases, I mean, they died at a very old age and they started doing it when they were very young. I think it just kind of adds to the fact that they weren't throwing their names out there for every single thing that happened. So this one, Ted, is a pretty interesting one. And I have an itty bitty little connection to it. It took place in West, I can never say this correctly, West Pittston, Pennsylvania. And many years ago, I think it was 2008, Dave and I drove, and we never drive that far, but we decided we were going to drive to Washington, D.C. for vacation instead of flying. Okay. Dave and I normally fly everywhere.
But you didn't fly when you went to Gettysburg, right?
No, because it's only 5 hours.
Well, how far is Washington, D.C.?
That's about 8 or 9. It's
not too bad, though, for a drive when you think about it, you know.
Yeah, Dave likes to drive. I am not a big, long, I'll drive like an hour and a half. That's about it for me. Dave's a little bit better with that, but even he said, you know what, 9 hours, let's just stop. So what we did was we drove down to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philly. And we drove down there because Philly's about 5 hours, 5-ish hours for us. And drove down there, stayed overnight in Valley Forge, and then we drove the last few hours the next day. On the way home, however, we ended up driving straight through that day, I believe. I don't think we stayed anywhere. But anyways, I said to Dave, Dave, I would like to stop in West Pittston, Pennsylvania on the way home and I would like to go to where the Smurls lived. And of course, Dave was like, what the hell are you talking about? I have no idea.
He's thinking of the Smurfs.
Smurfs.
Right. What the hell are the Smurls? Is that a new cartoon on NBC Saturday mornings?
I know, right? So he's like, oh, all right, weirdo. So I explained it to him because in 1991, a movie came out called The Haunted, and it starred Sally Kirkland, who ended up getting, I think, a Golden Globe for her performance in the movie, and it was based on the Smurl haunting. And I had watched the movie when it came out years and years and years ago. I'd watched it a couple times, and since we were going to be in that area, I said, well, let's go hunt down this house, which we did. So we stopped at the house, which is on Chase Street in West Pittston. And I saw an article yesterday. I was doing a little bit of research, and the article was from, I want to say 2022, and it said that the house has since been torn down.
Okay.
Which I was a little sad about because, I mean, sure, it's not historic, air quotes, but it is something that people knew about. And so it has apparently since been torn down. So I did get a picture of it. So we found it. We pulled up across the street, did not want to get the cops called on me for stalking these people, although it was kind of cute. They had a little, those flags that people put in their front yard, like they are on the little stand and they're long and they flap down. They had a Scooby-Doo one, which I thought was cute
that's
in
cool.
front of the house. Yeah. So anyways, so I remember the house, very nondescript. It was a duplex, and it's interesting. This is something also kind of an aside that I found out. When I was looking up information on the story yesterday, they said it was called a double block house. And I was like, a double block house? What the heck is a double block house? Well, come to find out, there's only one area in the whole United States that calls a duplex a double block. And that would have to be Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania.
Gotcha.
Which West Pittston is right there in the Wilkes-Barre area. So, So let's talk a little bit about the Smurl haunting, I think, and then let's talk a little bit about the Warrens and maybe give our take on what actually was going on here, because I have plenty of opinions on this one. So the Smurl haunting is rather famous. There was the movie that I talked about. There was also a book in 1986 called The Haunted. And so Jack and Janet Smurl moved to West Pittston and bought the home. I believe they bought the home in 1973. The Smurls moved into the duplex on Chase Street in West Pittston. Jack, Janet, and their 4 daughters were on one side of the house. So if you're looking at the house, facing the house, you have one door on the left, one door on the right, 2 sets of stairs going up to one shared porch. Okay. So Jack, Janet, and their 4 daughters were on one side, and then Jack's parents were on the other side. So they bought it with that intention that Jack's parents could live in one side of the house, they would live in the other.
Right.
Now, it wasn't that long after they moved in that Jack and Janet and the girls started hearing banging noises on the walls, on the ceilings. Then they started smelling foul odors for no reason at all. Then one night, this is actually really scary. This creeped me out big time. One night, their dog, a German Shepherd mix, was picked up and thrown forcefully against a wall.
Yikes.
Okay, so that's pretty crazy. They were experiencing things like their mattress shaking. Something, I watched a news story with Jack Smurl, and he actually demonstrated what was happening. And he stood at the end of the bed, and he literally pulled his mattress up probably a good 2 or 3 feet and then let it drop. And he said it wasn't just doing that. It was doing it over and over and over and over again in succession. Something pushed one of their daughters down a flight of stairs. They were physically and sexually assaulted on several occasions. Now, the Smurls were Roman Catholics, and they contacted the church, who honestly didn't take them really seriously at first because there was no proof. They didn't have any proof at the time.
And people have to understand, this is late 70s, right?
Mid 70s,
right.
Yes.
So there's no cameras. You can't just take out your iPhone and record something, right? Tape recorders were still pretty bulky. And so it wasn't as easy to capture evidence back then.
No, and basically it was, and that's part of the, not really a problem, but one of the things that I think about a lot with this particular haunting is that you're right. There were no cameras. There wasn't, people didn't have the knowledge or the understanding of what was going on 50 freaking years ago to know to capture proof. I mean, these people were like, scared to death. So what kind of proof can you give to somebody? And believe me, there were parapsychologists out there. There were a lot of paranormal people, but how do you find them? Nobody had internet. Nobody had a way of, I remember, not to get off on a tangent, but it's a good example. I remember hearing stories about missing people 40, 50 years ago, and that you couldn't just blast a missing person across the United States. It literally had to come in on telegraphs. And even 50 years ago, phone calls from one police station to another. It was very, very physical, time consuming. You had to really try to get the messages out there. It's not like today where at the snap of a finger, everybody in the world can know something at the same time.
I mean, think about this. They were using milk cartons to put missing people pictures on them.
Perfect example. Exactly. So, back then, how do you find proof, and how do you present that proof when you're a terrified family and all you have is your word, your story? That's all you have. And so the Roman Catholic Church, the Diocese of Scranton, they said that they weren't sure what might be causing the disturbances. And again, they didn't want to do an exorcism without definitive proof. It's important to understand, too, that exorcisms are pretty rare, especially in the Catholic Church. They do them. The Catholic Church has actually found a greater need for them these days. But the demonic possession is incredibly, incredibly rare. So I can understand them not wanting to jump on to something like that without some kind of proof. Now, however, with that being said, the home was blessed by several priests who said that they saw, quote, no harmful activity while on the property. I have a thought about that. I'll tell you in a minute. Janet Smurl claimed an unidentified priest performed 3 unsuccessful exorcisms and that the demon avoided the rites by moving between the duplex and following the family to other locations. In 1986, a priest from the local diocese spent 2 nights at the Smurl home and said, quote, nothing unusual happened during his stay there. Now, one thing I will say is this. The demonic are highly intelligent. The demonic is very, very intelligent. Highly intelligent. And it's not like you can trick them per se into showing themselves or, if they know that there's somebody there that wants to get rid of a demonic, why would they show themselves necessarily? They're very highly intelligent, right? So it makes sense. It makes sense that they may not see something. And if they're not going to go in, quote unquote, with guns blazing, I would think that that might be a reason. So I wanted to talk about exorcisms a little bit because I think that people have ideas about exorcisms and something called deliverance, which are similar, but yet not exactly the same. So let's talk just a little bit before we get back to the story. Let's talk a little bit about exorcisms. So the Catholic Church authorizes the use of exorcism for those who are believed to be the victims of demonic possession. Its efficacy depends on two elements: authorization from valid and licit church authorities and the faith of the exorcist. So in other words, it has to be approved by the Catholic Church, and it has to be an exorcism itself can only be by someone who has true and utter faith in Jesus Christ. The Catechism of the Catholic Church states, quote, "When the Church asks publicly and authoritatively in the name of Jesus Christ that a person or object be protected against the power of the evil one and withdrawn from his dominion, it is called exorcism," unquote. The Catholic Church revised the rite of exorcism in January of 1999, though the traditional rite of exorcism, which is in Latin, so they kind of changed it up a little bit and made it more readable, I guess is the word, from the original Latin, but it's still in the same context. It's allowed as an option, so either one is allowed. The ritual assumes that possessed persons retain their free will, though the demon may hold control over their physical body, and involves prayers, blessings, and invocations with the use of the document of exorcisms and certain supplications. So there's a thing called a solemn exorcism. And according to the canon law of the church, it can be exercised only by an ordained priest or higher, with the express permission of the local bishop, and only after a careful medical examination to exclude the possibility of mental illness. The Catholic Church says that the high majority of cases that they see is either some form of mental illness or instability, or it is not an actual possession. So there's different stages of the demonic. There's things like infestation. What's the other one? There's just a whole bunch of them, but they are not true possession. And if it's not a possession, they will not perform an exorcism. There are other things that they can do. So a deliverance is sort of that type of thing. A deliverance can be done when it's not a true possession.
So let me give you the 4 degrees of possession.
Yes, please. Could you? I don't
Infestation. Okay, so that would be like haunted house type stuff. Footsteps,
Right.
voices, apparitions. Oppression, physical attacks, sleep disturbances, frequent and severe illness, okay? Obsession, person has a hard time functioning, being constantly preoccupied with thoughts of the demonic activity. Sleep becomes impossible. And then finally, possession. Possession is not demons entering a person's body and taking over the soul. A person's free will is never removed, as you said, only severely compromised.
And one thing about this haunting that I found interesting was that the word exorcism, and that's why I wanted to look up exorcism. The word exorcism gets thrown around a lot in this case, but from the things that I've read, the research I've done on this case, I don't believe there was any true possession in this case.
Right.
Which would mean I don't know why the Catholic Church would have done an exorcism in this case. They may have done a deliverance, which is a little bit different, but not so much an exorcism. And I think the word exorcism gets thrown around so much when, again, true possession is incredibly rare. Incredibly rare. I think, if you ask me, I think that it was more of an infestation of the demonic than it was. And it doesn't take away the severity of it, but I don't think it actually was targeting one person. It sounds like it was targeting an entire family, which I think is a little different. Just as a layperson, it sounds different to me than a possession of someone.
So I just looked up, I love getting information and then going to Google right away. What did we do before Google?
I know. That's what I'm saying.
Oh my God. The Dewey Decimal
we
System
can
is
find
what
out
we
we have
did.
some weird illness, disease that we're going to die in 6 weeks.
Right.
What would we do without Google?
I've got a hangnail, but Google says it's cancer and I'm gone in 2 hours. But it does say that buildings can be possessed and that they can be exorcised and stuff like that too. So there are different levels of exorcism. So maybe
that's what they're saying. I think it's very loosely thrown around here.
yes. And I think the movie The Exorcist makes us immediately think that it's got to be an individual, right?
Right.
And
Agree.
Yeah. So
Agree. So, and did you know this? This is just a little tidbit for everybody. I found this out too. I actually heard this during my Ryan Buell webinar series, but I found it again yesterday. When you are baptized in the Catholic Church, like I was born and I was essentially raised Catholic. When you are baptized in the Catholic Church, it's considered an exorcism. It's a different kind of exorcism, but it is one just the same because you're literally cleansing any negativity, anything, and baptizing yourself into God's love and, accepting Jesus Christ as you're baptized.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting that is actually a form of exorcism.
I'm pretty sure that I was baptized. I'm sure it was not Catholic, though. I know that, but I'm sure that all of my sisters were baptized too.
I was baptized. I did the religious education for years and years. Yep. I did the first communion for years. I did do religious education up until I was, I think, 14 or so. And then this is a whole other show, but then my belief system, I became very disenchanted with the church itself. Mm-hmm. Not as much the religion on some level, but the church itself, and sort of kind of went off on my own. I still hold a lot of Catholic values and ideas, but I've sort of become a lot more well-rounded in my belief systems over the years and come to kind of a new understanding. That's why I say I'm more spiritual. I guess deep down I'm still always going to be Catholic because I do. But I just it's hard for me to accept the church after all these years with some of the stuff that I've seen, heard, experienced. Yeah. But one question a lot of people ask, there was a podcast that I checked out yesterday, and it was called the Catholic Answers Podcast. And they had a guest on, Father Vince Lampert. He has been a Catholic Church exorcist since 2000. And he was asked, quote, but you could do an exorcism, say, for example, someone who's a Hindu person comes to you and you come to a moral certainty that this person is afflicted. Can you, as a Catholic priest, can you help that person? And Father Lampert said, absolutely, because the church recognizes exorcism as a ministry of charity. As a ministry of charity, the church would always offer help to those who reach out to her. Now, obviously, as Christians, we're going to operate according to how the ritual is done within our church. So the person who's a non-Catholic, maybe from another world religion, such as being Hindu, they would at least have to be receptive to the Catholic approach to doing an exorcism for us to be able to do one and help them in that way. I just thought that was interesting tidbit too, because a lot of people do question that, if you're Muslim, if you're Hindu, if you're, any religion and you need help, can a different religion help you? And I guess the answer is yes, as long as you're open and receptive to that help and to the way that it's being done. So I just thought that was interesting as well. So just a little bit on exorcisms. One thing I read about deliverance. This was kind of funny. One article I read, they basically said that exorcisms are very high. Drama is not a good word, but very, very dramatic and very, are huge.
Yeah.
Whereas a deliverance is a little bit more laid back, a little bit more easygoing. And I'll tell a quick little story later when we talk about the Warrens a little bit more. But yeah, so I just thought that was interesting. So in 1980, now the Smurls apparently went through this for years. At least 10 or 12 years they went through this. And then because nobody would help them. So in 1986, Janet Smurl, by some chance, saw that Ed and Lorraine Warren were doing a program at a local college, and that they were demonologists. And so she went to that lecture, and she approached them afterwards and told them what was going on in her home. So it's important to know that they didn't just show up at her house.
Right.
She actually asked them to help her. And if you think about the fact that that's the only way those days that you were going to be able to know about someone, for the most part, that makes sense. So they came and they checked out the place. And it's important also to remember that Ed and Lorraine were very, very religion-based. Back then, there was not a lot of equipment. There was no sophistication to equipment. They went in very much with their feelings, their thoughts, their experiences. Ed did get audio of there is supposed to be audio from this house, but I haven't been able to track it down. I don't know if it was lost when Ed passed. I don't know. He passed in, I think, 2006. And so I don't know where this audio is because I can't find it so far. If I do, we'll share it. But there wasn't a lot that they could do other than their normal stuff, which was very faith-based. So Ed, after they went through the house, according to Ed, the demon that inhabited the Smurls' home was very powerful, and it shook mirrors and furniture after they tried to persuade it to leave by playing religious music and praying. Ed claimed he felt a drop in temperature and saw a dark mass form in the home, and the demon once left a message on a mirror telling him to get out. After months of investigation, he alleged that he had a number of audio tapes containing knocking and rapping caused by the demon, which again, unfortunately, if that's the best you have, anybody can make a knocking sound. Anybody can make a rapping sound. We don't have a lot of other ways to keep track, to
prove
show
it.
People,
right.
to prove it, so it makes it tough. And I think that's part of the reason why Ed and Lorraine are so judged, because in the time that they came from, there wasn't that much. I'll tell you right now, I bet if Ed and Lorraine were younger and around in this era, with all of the different scientific tools that can be used along with their religious approach and along with their ability, Lorraine's ability and everything, I think they probably be taken a little bit different by the people who don't like Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Yeah.
There's a lot of skeptics out there. And again, it's okay to be a skeptic, but I think it's important to look at the big picture of everything. So in 1986, the Smurls told the press they were tired of the constant media bombardment. But then a few months later, they had authored, along with Ed and Lorraine, and a Scranton, Pennsylvania newspaper writer, Robert Curran, a paperback book version of the story called The Haunted. Then the same year, the pastor of Immaculate Conception Parish in West Pittston, Reverend Joseph Adonisio, said the Smurls felt that after intense prayers that things were back to normal. In 1987, Janet told reporters that they still heard knocking and saw shadows. After the Smurl family moved to Wilkes-Barre, which is literally like a twin, it's like right down the road. Deborah Owens moved into the former Smurl home in 1988, and she told reporters that she never encountered anything supernatural while living there. And then in 1991, the made-for-TV movie with Sally Kirkland, The Haunted, was released. The interesting thing was that there really wasn't any true evidence to support their claims, but I myself have watched a lot of news stories, video, telling their story. And to me, they were very believable. And I think that today you have to look at your gut. You have to use your gut feeling a lot with people. And I think us, Todd, as investigators, paranormal investigators, we've learned that we have to rely on our gut feelings a lot.
Right.
Because what happens is when you rely on your gut feelings, it helps lead you in a direction, the next direction to take. And so it's just, it's fascinating. Do I think that something, without a doubt, I think they had stuff going on in their home, without a doubt. Do I know that it was definitely even an infestation by the demonic, or was it just a really dark haunting? It's different.
So two quick comments. Once you sent me the video of a news report on it, so that kind of led me to look at some other things as well. And there's a lot of thoughts that maybe the house wasn't haunted, but the actual family or the family members were the ones that were haunted, that were being followed and stuff like that.
Right.
And the other thing I want to say about, so when you go and occasionally you will visit cemeteries and you will try to connect, and you've got your K2 or your Mel meter and blah, blah, blah. Right. And you can, and sometimes it seems like you've connected and you get feelings and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So you are a skeptic who has abilities and who believes that there are things that we can't explain. So you are a believer as well.
Right.
When you do that, you are not capturing audio and video and everything else to try and prove to anyone else what you experienced, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that we have to keep in mind, like with this story, before it broke and kind of got out there and it was known in the public and there were reporters and all that kind of stuff, Ed and Lorraine went in to help this family. If Sandy and Todd went in to help a family, right? We would use the equipment that we now have available to us,
right?
But it wouldn't be necessarily important for us to capture every shadow and every blah, 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 because we were not planning on sharing that and creating news stories and books and movies and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So that's the other thing. Like when I watched some of the stories and read some of the accounts of what happened, I'm just thinking, well, they were there to help this family. I don't know in this case that they were there to make money off a book or a movie or anything like that, And so I do have to say again, I just went on an investigation and we caught some stuff, and we all kind of have a feeling of what we think it is, but we certainly don't have in front of us a bunch of evidence that I could show you and go, look at this. This is what happened, kind of thing. We don't have that because we didn't go in with that thought process.
And again, why like we've said before, I don't understand why people are so against people making a living from something. It doesn't mean necessarily that you're lying.
Right.
That you're a charlatan, that you're taking advantage of people. It just means that you have to put food on your table. And if you're going to help people, let's take, for example, 10,000 cases. Maybe there's 20, 25, and maybe I'm even being overly counting more, but let's say there's 25 cases out of thousands, even if it's 5,000 cases that they helped in their lifetime. I don't know what all those cases are. Let's say there's 25. So out of all of those, that makes them liars. That makes them
opportunists.
Opportunists. And I'm not saying they weren't.
Sure.
Because there were some where I feel like maybe they were.
Sure.
But it's not, again, yes, you can, again, today's paranormal shows, same kind of thing.
Yep.
You're going to, I was watching the Project Fear guys. It used to be Destination Fear, and they have their own show now on YouTube called Project Fear. And they went to the Penhurst Asylum Paracon not too long ago, and they were filming it, and they were in the car on the way, and they're like, I can't believe we get to go here, and our show was canceled. You know, I mean, people love it. So if people are buying it and people are enjoying it, why can't they make a living off of it? Why can't they do that? They're also helping people, not necessarily the Project Fear people, but they're also helping people in the process.
And I think about this, like you can have a TikTok account and you can lip sync and dance to shit and make a lot of fucking money, right?
Right.
If you can, good for you. If I had that talent and I had the knowledge of how to get people to follow and all that kind of stuff, I would do it in a heartbeat. But whatever. Like, if we could make money on this podcast, do you think we would turn it down? Absolutely fucking not. Pay me more.
We thought we were going to at the beginning. We've actually paid money to do the podcast. We've lost money to do the podcast. We just love it. We love it. But if we could make money off of it, it would be fantastic, Todd. So I guess I don't know. I can't say one way or another if the Warrens were, unscrupulous, shysters, taking advantage of. I can't say one way or the other. Do I believe that Lorraine truly had ability? I sure do. I do believe it. I'll tell you, everybody, I've been talking about this a lot, but I'm going to tell you one more story about the Ryan Buell webinar. It was really good because the last two classes were about the demonic, and I learned an awful lot because I didn't know a lot about the demonic. And thank God I have, in all of these years and investigations and experiences I've done, I've seen some negative things. I've seen some darker things, but I have never, ever had to experience the demonic. And I don't want to. Okay. But there was an episode. One of the reasons I loved this series so much was because Ryan would give us case studies. And some of them were from the show that they did, Paranormal State. And one of the more well-known ones was I Am 6. And it was about this girl. She wasn't really a girl. She was a young woman. And she was getting ready. She was in college. And she came down with a really bad disease. And she wasn't going to be able to finish college. She was living at home with her parents. And long story short, they believed that she had become, if not fully possessed, then at least very oppressed by. And part of it was, and Ryan said this, part of it was that he felt like she almost in a way welcomed it because her whole world had been turned upside down by this affliction, this disease that she had. And she couldn't do anything she had planned to do in her life now. And so it was almost like it was like a flirtation. And she finally gave into it, and she liked the attention of it, and it kind of made it even worse. So at one point, Ryan, who really truly loved Lorraine Warren, Lorraine just died in 2019. I don't get the feeling he was as close to Ed as he was Lorraine, but he was very close to Lorraine, and he brought her on the show several times. And he brought her in on this case. And he also had a priest. It wasn't a Catholic priest, but there are several demonologists who are of other religions that a lot of the shows use that involve this type of thing. And he brought him on, and he brought Lorraine in, and they were upstairs in the bedroom, and they were doing a deliverance. And a lot of the stuff that was in the show that they record doesn't make it into the show. Yep. And he showed a recording from this deliverance that was much more involved than what actually made it to the show. And at one point, Chad Kalick, who was on the show sometimes too, who was a friend of Ryan's, he was holding the camera, and he had never experienced it before. It was kind of funny. It was about 3 minutes long, and you could see the camera just shaking like crazy because he was scared shitless. Like, he didn't know what the heck he was thinking about this whole situation. And there's the father, the priest, and there's Lorraine, and everybody's around. And the priest actually was doing a great job, but he was a little nervous and kind of lost his place a few times. And Lorraine, I'll tell you, Todd, I'm watching this, and the camera's on Lorraine, and she's literally like, she knows her shit. Like, she knows the words without having to read them out of a book. And she was intense, and she was right on it, and she was leading him through this deliverance. And that was something for me that said a lot, because you could see the caring in her face. You could see the seriousness of the situation. You could see the teaching that she was doing, the leading that she was doing during this. This was something she had handled many, many times before. And it was just very, I guess, personal, like to just be a part of something, to watch this on this shaky camera of her, just really the caring that came out of her. And so after I watched that and during the class, it kind of, even for me, changed a little bit of the way I looked at Lorraine. You can think whatever you want about Ed. Was he a hanger-on? Did he, was he just there because she was really the one who could do a lot of the stuff? I cannot tell you yes or no. But I will tell you, after watching that, I really felt like she really was legit. Their methods weren't what our methods are of today. They have very old-fashioned methods. They were based in the Catholic religion. She used to carry an idol from Father, I can't remember, Padre Pio, I think was his name. And he was a very well-known monk. And she had an artifact from him that she would carry everywhere with her, especially in these situations. I mean, we're talking really old-fashioned stuff. And they did help. You hear a lot about the ones that they couldn't help in, but is everybody 100%? No. With anything they do? No. But they had different methods than most people are used to, and I think that may make people uncomfortable or disregard it easily, especially today in the day of science. And yeah, when I go into an investigation, I use my abilities, I use my personal experiences, but I also use science. And they really weren't able to do that as much back then. So do I think that Lorraine was a fraud? No. Do I think that maybe they were a little opportunistic at times? Probably, but wouldn't we all be in that situation? But I do think that they did contribute to the world of paranormal investigation in a huge, huge way. And I put a thing up in our group the other day, and I just asked a simple question. Were Ed and Lorraine Warren legit or not? And the majority of people did say yes. They really thought that they were. And I'm just going to read a couple of the responses because people can put comments in. I'm just going to read these real quick and let everybody know, where everybody's mind is. Amanda says, I think they were, but I also think some of it was fluff to just keep their name relevant. Chris says, I did not know them as people. I believe that they wanted to help others. I think possibly there was fluff added to stories. You don't know what attributes are strong in people. It's so personal. Lorraine sounds like she had some strong psychic attributes. It is a blessing. I thank them but sometimes it can be a challenge. I thank them for being brave and bringing spiritual paranormal issues to the forefront in their time. It's how I learned my life growing up wasn't weird, just different. Have a blessed day, all. And Christy says, I think they, like Hans Holzer, which Hans Holzer, by the way, went through a lot of the same stuff.
Yes.
A lot of the same stuff. And he was a pioneer in the field as well. We're pioneers. I feel that we learned both good and bad from them. But just as the media trumps things up, they were only humans. I believe they truly tried to help people. And as We always say intention is everything. We all make mistakes, but we're lucky that no one is following us around, exposing the skeletons in our own closets.
Well, I mean, think about that too, right? Right now, if the Sandy and Toddcast went worldwide, how many people would be there to throw us under a bus? Either our abilities or what we do or who we are, things that happened in our past. Right?
Right.
So that's what bothers me when people get on Lorraine and Ed. There's a lot of stories about their personal life and stuff. That's none of our fucking business.
None of our business.
If that's the life that they led and that's what they did, then that's the way it is. And if you can honestly look at yourself in the mirror and say, you can make a movie of my life in real time and show the world everything I've ever thought, did, said, then you are a saint.
That's right.
But
That's
I
right.
can even sit here and say, I don't want everybody to know my shit. Right?
Right.
Because we all have it.
Of course we do. We all do. And again,
And when you're trying to denounce somebody's work or their abilities, the first thing you do is find the stuff in their past to try and show that they're not worthy of the praise or the work that they've done. It's the first thing people do is you look at their personal lives and go, well, this was fucked up. Look what they did here. Look what was said here. You know, he had a girlfriend or Lorraine did this.
I know. It's none of my. First of all, I have not seen 1 ounce of proof of any of it. In the either way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because what I do in my life is my business, and unless you have solid proof and not just somebody talking about something about my life, then it's nothing. It means nothing. It means nothing. And I do think that the Warrens made a huge. They were huge pioneers in the field.
Absolutely.
Just like Hans Holzer, who,
Yes.
again, I know you make fun of me, but when I was 14 years old, I wasn't reading Sweet Valley High books. I was reading Hans Holzer books because he was a pioneer in the field. And he may have not done things with the same techniques that you and I would do things today, but that's because it was 60, 70 years ago that he was doing these things, and we have different ways of doing them now. Does that discredit the way that Hans Holzer did it, the way that Ed and Lorraine did it?
It shouldn't.
Not at all.
Right?
Not
And
at all.
even think of when you started to do investigations, even by yourself or whatever, the first means of equipment that you had, right? My first audio recorder was a little handheld tape recorder. And when we did our last investigation, we used an actual old school tape recorder to try something different. We were going back to the old days, right? But like even the equipment in the time that we've been doing it, the 10, 15, 20 years, whatever, it's changed. We know more about some of the equipment where maybe what we were trusting 10, 15 years ago, we don't trust quite as much now because now we're learning how other things can affect it, right?
Very few things that I used in the beginning do I still use today.
Right.
K2 meter, of course I do. I still use digital record, but I use good quality digital recorders now. And, I've learned. And I can't say that 50 years ago, what did we have 50 years ago? Tape on reels.
Yep.
That's what they used, was tape on reels 50, 55 years ago.
I was 7 years old when I got my first handheld Panasonic tape recorder. There's still a picture floating around of me at Christmas. The family got a dog. Everybody's around the dog. Todd's over in the corner with his tape recorder. Okay. Should have told my family all they needed to know about what my life was going to be like.
I remember laying in my grandparents' living room on Sunday, listening to Casey Kasem this has nothing to do with the paranormal, but although it was weird. But we all did it with the tape recorder ready to go, listening to the radio so that when my songs that I liked came on the Casey Kasem Top 40, I could hit the record button and keep and record my songs so I could listen to them on the recorder anytime. And you kind of butt the recorder up against the radio speaker so that you can make sure you get it all in there. And yeah, That was.
And now
that was
your
the
long
70s.
distance dedication. This one's coming from Sandy, who writes, Dear Casey, I lay on my grandparents' floor every Sunday and listen to your show. I've got a small tape recorder and I record the songs. Then I listen to them all week long. Sandy, here's your long distance dedication.
That was very good.
Yeah.
I don't think you ever did that on this show. So I remember, but those were the things we had. And now look at what we have. You know, I mean, it's a different world.
I will tell you, when we were investigating this last time, and David Williams pulled out the old school cassette recorder, I almost died. But then here's the other thing. So we had it and we were using it. And somebody, and I can't remember who said it, but I think it was Jason Mansmith who said, he goes, I keep hearing this white noise, right? He's like, I keep hearing this white noise. It's really strange. And I'm sitting there on stage and I turn my head just a certain way. And you know how sometimes when you turn your head, you'll hear something you hadn't heard because the direction of the sound actually hits your ear.
Yes.
And all of a sudden I go, oh my God, I hear that too. And here it was, the tape recorder hissing as the tape was recording over the heads in the little tape recorder.
I was watching a show, Dave and I were watching something just recently when the investigators decided to go old school. And I can't remember what it was. I'll probably think of it 10 minutes after we stopped taping today. But it was so funny because we said, yeah, we should try something like that sometime and really go old school and see what happens. And I wish for the life of me I could remember what it was, but it was so cool. And I thought, maybe sometimes we should go back and use the simpler methods and see what can happen. Think
about this. When tapes came out, first 8-tracks came out right after albums and records and all that. 8-tracks came out. They stuck around for a very short period of time because they really weren't that great. You couldn't get as much music on them. And halfway through a song, you'd hear the whole when it switched to the next track. So it would ruin your music. So then cassettes became big for a long time. And then it became digital tape and CDs. But you can look behind me in my studio. I've got a whole thing of records. We went back to it because there's some nostalgia there. But there's also things about that experience of listening to music that is better when you're sitting in front of the turntable, watching that record go around, listening to it that way. And I think you're right. I think you're right.
It's a different way of looking at it.
Yes, correct.
And if you go into something old school with the knowledge of today, it actually may help you discern things better. You're using today's knowledge with yesterday's equipment. Yeah. I think it's kind of a neat idea. So you never know. You've got to be ready for every situation these days in every investigation. You just have to be ready.
When did you ever watch the movie The Haunted?
Yeah, I did. A couple times I saw it.
I don't think I've ever seen it.
You should watch it. It was actually a good movie. It was a little cheesy. It was 1991, but it was a good movie. It was really enthralling. The house in the movie looks absolutely nothing like the house in real life.
Of course.
But I thought Sally Kirkland did a great job. And it really depicted, I think, what was probably going on in that house. From all accounts. And again, I really do believe they had some pretty serious haunting going on there. I can't tell you just from watching a movie and looking at internet stories whether or not it was truly demonic. But I will tell you that watching them do interviews, they were terrified for their lives.
Yeah.
And of course, you can't blame people for doing interviews either because there wasn't anything like that. And the news people just ate that up.
Of course.
People ate it up back then. So, and here's people who are thinking, I'm telling you right now, they're thinking, if I can get my story out, maybe somebody can help us.
And as the consumers, right, we had movies like Dracula and Frankenstein and all that kind of stuff. But we didn't have the haunted stories until Amityville, really.
Yeah.
That were based on a true story kind of thing. We didn't have that prior to that because nobody. So I mean, if you look back to newspapers around that time, when The Exorcist came out and when Amityville came out, the lines to go to these movie theaters were wrapped around the block. Right. Because so many people were interested in this stuff because it had not really been brought out to the public before. So there was a real frenzy of desire for information. So if the Warrens saw that and said, well, you know, we're going to make some money on this a little bit. Have at it.
You got to put food on the table. Yep. I mean, they were doing the lecture circuit, and I don't know what they were getting paid for doing it, but they were doing the lecture circuit all the time.
But there's all these paracons. These guys are out every freaking weekend doing these paracons and making a good living. Sure. I mean,
they didn't have paracons 50 years ago.
Right.
So what were they going to do? They got to put food on the table. I'm a little leery of people who protest too much about others and other people. I mean, I know we talk about ghost adventures, but you know what? In and of itself,
it's entertainment.
I don't like it. I don't respect it. I think that people who are diehard ghost adventures people really should just take a step back and think about the effect that it's having on certain people.
But don't you think the people who are true fans, even they know?
They must.
That it's not all real. And they're into it. It's entertainment. Yeah.
Even the people that I think are 150% legit, they still have to make it entertaining.
Yeah.
You know, it is entertainment in the end. Do they go to, would they go on their own investigations that aren't publicized and be, not be as entertaining? Of course. I don't think I'm that entertaining during an investigation.
No shit.
But when I do my show, I'm a little bit more entertaining because I know that it's an entertainment show.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that it's not legit. I think the problem I have with Ghost Adventures is that they take the entertainment way, 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 way too far.
They've almost lost the actual investigative part.
Right.
To the other stuff.
Yeah.
We've gone long enough. I think at this we should throw in the spiel here. What do you say?
Let's do it.
You can find the Sandy and Toddcast on any of the platforms that you normally find your podcasts, including YouTube and Twitter. Be sure to like the Sandy and Toddcast on Facebook to keep up on the latest goings-on, including each week's episode. You can also join our group, Stay Weirdos Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast, for more fun. Stay Weirdos is a safe place to share your thoughts, feelings, ideas, and random inappropriate memes without judgment. Sandy and Todd also have a podcast called the Empathecary Podcast. It's for empaths, by empaths. And if you know an empath, you might want to listen too. Find and like the page on Facebook. And finally, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast and just aren't sure where to start, Sandy and Todd can also help with that too. Mindgarden Media is their latest project where the dynamic duo can guide you every step of the way in your podcasting journey. Editing, producing, and consulting is what they do. Like Mindgarden Media on Facebook or email them at themindgardenmedia@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for staying weird.
So we've got one more episode in this season, right?
Yes. So next week, we're going to have a little bit of a bonus episode. We're going to take a quick break for next weekend. I think I'm going to do a Sandy Cemeteries. I got a really cool one. And then we'll be back to wrap up the season the week after in 2 weeks. And then we're going to take a few weeks off, but throw in some bonus content and start season 11 at the beginning of the new year.
Fingers crossed. Unless between now and then we just decide that we've had enough of this shit.
We're walking away.
We've had enough of you people. We're tired of it. You've done nothing for us. I'm just kidding.
We're kidding. So, but again, thank you to everybody who supports us and who's there for us. And it makes me really happy to know that we can actually be relatable and help people. And, if you have any questions or you have any comments, feel free to contact us. Everything's in the show notes. And we're always there to talk.
All right. Till, next time, kind of. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.